of you might be wondering what kind of creatures lurk in the depths of the ocean. So there's this really neat site you can scroll down and it shows what sea creatures live at what depth, which I thought was really cool. So now you know. But this video isn't all about sea creatures, but rather the terrors and secrets that lie in wait in the deep. So be ready for that. Also subscribe for a high five from a seal, but without further ado, let's slide into number 10. Marriage proposals can be some of the scariest experiences on Earth. Some of us worry our heads off just trying to come up with a decent time and place to just ask our significant other that massive question. But for this diver, that dive into the thought of marriage was the last plunge he ever took. This skeleton belonged to Katerina Valenskova, a Russian freediver. She was instructed to come to these coordinates by her longtime boyfriend to make for a very unique wedding proposal. Unfortunately, the diver never got to pop the question, as when his boat was nearing the dive site, a party boat piloted by a drunk man collided with his ship, and he sadly passed away from the accident. Katerina then, struck with grief, instructed her handlers to turn off her oxygen and then choose to drown right there directly in the spot. I think the creepiest part for me is how she's somehow still sitting up in that chair, almost like Kate's waiting for her deceased boyfriend to join her to this day. I don't know about you guys, but I know that I'm never proposing to anybody like this. Number 9. If you're not familiar with the story of Jason Voorhees, then this little scrap will help you understand a bit better. As a child, Jason was often bullied by other children for being handicapped, and the kids from her mother's workplace at Camp Crystal Lake were no exception. In fact, those psychopathic kids are the ones who chose to throw Jason into the deep depths of the lake as a child, all the while knowing he couldn't swim, as they simply laughed as the boy drowned. In isolation, that story is terrifying, but that same Jason rose from the murky depths and became the living nightmare we know today from cult classic films like Friday the 13th. Now, with this backstory out of the way, you're probably wondering how it all ties together. Well, it's probably better if I just show you. This statue of the slasher was found at the bottom of Lake Pleasant in Arizona, rather than its original resting place in Crystal Lake, New Jersey. But regardless of where it is, if that statue is lurking beneath the waters, I'm steering clear of that location. Sure, we can make plenty of jokes about it, but it's all fun and games until that statue goes missing one day. After all, he already rose from the water once. I'm sure he can definitely do it again. Number 8. As creepy as some of the things you've seen and will see in this video are, the act of scuba diving is actually a really pleasurable experience that I recommend each of you try at least once if you're ever able to. However, if you do try it once and you come across something like this, I wouldn't blame you if you hung up your wetsuit and flippers for good. These faces were created by British sculptor James DeCaires Taylor as part of the world's first underwater sculpture park. And for as cool as the idea is, I hope it remains as the only park of its kind for the foreseeable future. There's just something so incredibly eerie about seeing human sculptures drowned in the deep depths below the water. Although these pieces of art can be seen as unsettling to some, the intention by James in making them was to draw divers away from natural reefs, which have been damaged massively by human intervention over the years, and instead bring that tourism to his one-of-a-kind park, which is super admirable. Even with his good intentions, the visuals here do give off a really ominous vibe. If you guys ever end up taking a dive down by the park, try to make sure you don't end up like the sunken statues below. Number 7. Going out for a trip along the river can be a great time for many, whether you're there to hang with friends or you just went to just have a chill day to yourself. Most of the time, you can expect there to be a cooler or two somewhere in the vicinity, usually kept around for refreshments and food for longer outings. What you don't expect, however, is to open up one of those coolers and find this. Now, why would anybody just throw a doll in a cooler and send it floating down a river like that? You can try to convince me that it's not some possessed doll somebody tried to get rid of, but why on earth would they duct tape this chuggy knockoff to the bottom then? Seeing this live in person would have 100% given me goosebumps. I just hope it's not the day of the living dummy for these guys' sakes. Number 6. Now, if you remember back to those statues that were crafted as a means to attract tourism to the area and prevent further human damage to the underwater environment, this next entry caters to tourists looking to take a dive as well. But it's presented in a seemingly more tragic way. You can catch this eerie sight off the coast of Jordan, submerged completely below the surface. The plane itself was donated by the country's Air Force and was previously a carrier ship tasked with transporting Jordanian military personnel on a multitude of missions. But don't worry, the skeleton wasn't part of the plane's crew, rather it was intended to be a prop for tourists to take pictures with, along with a few other spooky additions. I don't know if I'd want to take a selfie with Jack the Jordanian skeleton, but you might be able to encounter some other wayward souls on the vessel. Rumor has it that the airplane still contains the spirits of some soldiers who never made it back home. Unable to rest, these wandering phantoms are now left at the bottom of the deep blue. Number 5. D Almighty is an underwater explorer who spends a reasonable chunk of his time traversing the watery unknown all around the world. As such, he finds loads of treasures while venturing around the deep blue. But on occasion, what he finds doesn't exactly glimmer like gold. On first glance, that little black box could contain anything really, and as is human nature, he decides to take a look to see what's within. While we can't exactly read the label, what's contained in that bag are the cremated remains of a deceased human being. I can't blame him at all for screaming like that. Honestly, if this were me, I would have dropped the bag and swam to the surface as fast as possible. However, instead of panicking, he got the bag and the box up to the surface and decided to reach out to the local authority, which I totally respect, considering he wanted to handle the remains with care and respect, rather than just throwing them back and fleeing the scene. While this is surely one of his more unique dives, I'm willing to bet he would have rather found some other treasures over seeing something as disturbing as this. Number 4. Speaking of respect, I want to take a moment and mention that with this next clip, we're going to be as respectful as possible with the religious figure that's depicted in this underwater invocation. The statue is made of a solid bronze and depicts the Messiah, Jesus Christ, standing with his arms outstretched towards the surface. It was placed off in the Mediterranean Sea and was put into the depths as a way to honor the memory of the first fallen Italian scuba diver, Dario Gonzatti. It's meant to offer guidance to wandering spirits and as such has remained there since it was originally placed all the way back in 1954. The statue only remained to the surface briefly on 2 separate occasions. The first one was to replace the figure's missing hands, and the other was to clean the statue. Even still though, imagine taking a dip in the ocean and coming across this towering brass figure. I can guarantee if you hadn't known why it was there, you'd be hightailing it back to your boat to get out of there ASAP. Number 3. As we learned with D Almighty in our number 5 entry, not everything you find beneath the surface is what you'd expect. And while we learned that valuable lesson from him, I don't think many of us would anticipate finding something quite as ominous as this below the surface. If you couldn't make that out, this guy actually found a voodoo doll under the water. And not only that, but the thing was taped to a rock and hurled into the river. If you know anything about these dolls, you'll know that this was done with ill intent as a means to invoke the supernatural powers of voodoo and essentially drown someone. And while we can't really see a name or anything on the doll, we can assume the person it was made for wasn't very well liked by the creator. Regardless of who it was for or why it was there, one thing's for sure, that doll being here is just flat out terrifying. Number 2. We're all aware of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, right? You know, the headless horseman and all that. Well, while this isn't the same Sleepy Hollow, this town might have an even scarier ghost story to tell its inhabitants. Legend has it that after docking their ship and getting their loot, a group of pirates rebelled against their captain and sent him down the plank into the murky depths below. Held there in time and weighted down below the surface, the captain stays tapered to his own desk. His crewmates sent him to his sunken fate, then took off with their treasure, leaving the captain and any memory of him to rot for all eternity. This honestly sounds like it could be the backstory for one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies or something, but if you stop for a minute and leave that story on its own, it's pretty chilling. But I'd imagine encountering this submerged ex-pirate face to face would probably be much more terrifying. Number 1. At the end of the day, I think the most frightening part about the ocean is that to this day, we've only explored roughly 5% of what there is to see in the treacherous depths below. As humans, we're prone to fearing the unknown. So much so that when we can't identify something, it can be a downright terrifying experience. As such, we're still taking our time to explore the vast, deep caverns of the ocean. That being said, there are plenty of undiscovered species roaming the depths. If you thought the anglerfish from Nemo was scary, you haven't seen one of these guys. This deep sea creature is known as the magnapenis squid, and those extremely long tentacles take up approximately 90% of its body. Tell me this thing doesn't look like a real-life alien. It's speculated that this subspecies of cephalopod eats by ensnaring its prey in those very tentacles. You know what? I think I'm actually good if that whole 5% of the ocean figure stays where it's at, especially if this is just the tip of the iceberg for the rest of the deep sea horror movie monsters. Oh my god. But that concludes our underwater expedition. If you enjoyed this video, check out this other video right here, and I will see you guys over there. Be sure to subscribe and keep it here on Top 5 Central.